It wasn't until 10 years after I was fired from CBS that I recognized and I had this epiphany that I am grieving. And it so took me by surprise, but all of a sudden everything fell into place. It was like, this is why I'm really struggling to reconnect with my sense of purpose and mission and ambition and passion and values, was that I had been decimated. And because I didn't know I was grieving, I didn't have the skills and tools to mourn.
Hey friend, welcome to the Next Best Thing podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Cline-Thomas. Now I'm here to help you live the life that you design instead of choosing a life you think you have to settle for. Let these conversations be your guide. We have a very timely, very important conversation that we're going to have today. But before we go ahead and dive in, we got to talk. Yep. You and we got to talk. Now, I talk a lot on this podcast about journalism jobs and how the industry consolidations have led to mass layoffs. That's not just isolated to journalism. Tech has dealt with its own fair share of layoffs in recent years. But let me tell you what. I'm from the DC area, the DMV, the M to be exact, as in Maryland or Merland, as some people like to say. And I can tell you for sure that no one embodies the idea of having a good government job quite like a federal worker. Okay. Yes, you go into the federal government to serve, but also when you go into the federal government, you essentially kind of trade getting paid market value for your skills. You trade that for job security, pretty much lifetime job security. And I'm not talking about the political appointees that you see on television. I am talking about the civil servants who go into work every single day and make sure that this country runs. Now, of course, they're not just in the DC area. They're also all across the country. But, clearly they're concentrated in the DC area. And that job security that so many of them relied on, the rug has been pulled from up under them. It'd be one thing to say, oh, they got laid off. Oh, they got fired. No. They were kicked out. Every day we're seeing folks just get kicked out of their jobs abruptly. I'm not even going to go into details of that, but just the whole idea of what we thought was secure is no longer secure anymore. And have you been on LinkedIn? Have you? These job searching streets are absolutely no joke. Now, according to LinkedIn's Workforce Confidence Survey, get this, 53% of Americans have been on the job hunt for more than 6 months. 6 months. Over 1 in 3 have been searching for more than a year. Now, if you don't have a full 12 months of emergency savings to cover you, where a job loss wouldn't completely destabilize your life, if you don't have that money already tucked away in the bank right now, I'm going to need you to go ahead and lean in. Come closer. Come closer. There's no such thing as a safe job. I'm going to say it again. I want you to hear it. There is no such thing as a safe job. That safe job, that good, stable job went on to glory. It did. The concept of job security is dead. I don't care if your boss likes you. I don't care if you got a great performance review. I don't care if you have a contract. There's a chance that you won't be that special one getting a job with another company in 2 months. You are amazing. You are great. You are a boss. You add value. You are important. You is kind. You is impotent. You probably won't get a job in 2 months right now. And so we have to take all of that into account. And I oftentimes feel like I'm shouting into the void because I created this whole podcast for that very reason, understanding that things are changing and are shifting before our very eyes, and we need to shift with it. Still, I am finding myself really having to justify it over and over and over again. I've created programming to help folks with it. I contract experts to come to put on hands-on workshops, creating an ecosystem where you will get accountability and support as you do the work, to really, it's not just future proofing your career, but it's making sure that one decision that one person is making based on a spreadsheet doesn't completely blow up your life. You deserve better than that. You deserve better than someone who only focuses on the bottom line with zero context, that they can just come in a drop of the hat and just turn your life upside down. Like, I hate seeing that for people. I hate seeing it. And so, what I'm trying to do through this podcast, through the Next Best Thing community that just launched, is really create a space where people, as we always say, can live the life that they design. They don't have to be victims of their circumstance. That is my goal, really out of love. But sometimes I got to yell a little bit to make sure that y'all are hearing me, that it doesn't matter. We are in different times. So different times call for different strategies. That's all I'm here to say. That's what I'm saying. So if you would like to be a part of the Next Best Thing community, again, hands-on workshops and trainings to make sure that we don't just talk about the work, that we actually do the work so we can move the needle, to future-proof our life and our career, so we're not destabilized because somebody just doesn't want us to be around anymore. Check the show description. There is a link to join the waitlist, so you will be the first to know when the waitlist reopens. Right now, we have a cohort in there, and we just started, and they are getting to work. Okay, good talk. Now to the episode. And I'm doing this out of love because job losses are terrible. And they're not just devastating financially, it also can take a huge toll on your emotional well-being. I'm talking about not just in the moment, but for years after that traumatic experience. It's a traumatic experience. Even if you're one of 100,000, it's still a traumatic experience for you. And so that's why I've invited my new friend now, Laverne McKinnon, to be our guest on today's episode. She's not just a career coach, she's a grief specialist. Yes, job loss can cause grief. And Laverne knows firsthand what it's like to be blindsided during a layoff. And in this conversation, we talk about how to bounce back better. And Laverne even really challenged me to really consider if I've done all the work necessary to best reflect on and process my whole transition. I love this conversation. I love this conversation. I hope you see yourself. If you haven't been laid off, if you are not in transition, please, 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 please love on somebody and share this episode with them. People need to hear this right now. It's just tough times out there. People need to hear this episode. So if you could help me and share it with them, I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, now here's Laverne. Laverne, thank you so much for being here. Your work has been important, but I feel like right now in this moment, it is completely invaluable. Like, we need what you're doing now more than ever before. So I'm just thrilled that you are taking time out to chat with us.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm also it makes me sad to be here, to be talking about these things, but I also feel like the awareness and validating people's realities during a very challenging and difficult marketplace is so, so important.
It's so important, and let's first talk. I want to talk about your personal experience, but I want to start by talking about grief, because we don't always associate grief with like job loss, or we don't always associate grief with the workplace. But explain that to people. How does it manifest? How does it show up?
Well, grief is the experience of loss, and most of us think about grief as it relates to the loss of someone that we know, of death, even pet loss. There's a category of grief that's called disenfranchised grief. It's a term that was coined by a bereavement expert, Kenneth Doka, and it describes any type of loss that's not openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, socially validated. So career grief falls under this banner of disenfranchised grief, where it's a type of loss that people don't really think of as grief, because we all have experienced, I think there's a statistic, if I'm getting it correct, is something like 70% of all people have experienced some form of job loss in their careers. And so it's very, very common. And then we just like walk it off, but we don't understand that for many people, we are attached to the job, the identity, aspects of having that job. And so just to go on for this like 30 more seconds here, is that for some people, they might lose a job and it's completely fine. And for other people, it's not. And it's because of our attachment. The depth of attachment dictates the depth of the sense of loss.
Oh, explain that more, because the thing is, like, what relationship should we be having with work?
Well, I'm not so eager to jump into like what like should we have in terms of our relationship with our jobs. The hard truth is that in Western society, we have been taught, and I believe it's because of living in a capitalist society,
Yes.
that our identities are tied to our jobs. Like the first thing that people ask when they meet us is like, "Oh, what do you do?" And so immediately that puts a lot of weight and significance on our jobs and our careers. And I feel like with all of the clients that I have worked with, that there is a sense of shame. And also I've experienced that shame as well, as someone says, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, I feel like I'm caught in a headlight of like,
Yes.
well, I was this, but now I'm unemployed. And I'm like, well, do I get to say that I'm still a producer? Do I get to still say I'm an engineer? Do I get to still say I'm a journalist if I'm not actually getting actively paid for that in this moment? So there's this real sense of deep shame around when we're not able to execute or live our identity through our work.
When I tell you, when I left my career, really, that was the biggest surprise, was the introduction that I just didn't know. I mean, even now, I just fumbled and bubbled. What do you do? I was like, well, and the other person on the other side is just standing, like looking at you, fumbling and bumbling as you're like, well, what does that, what does that mean? Like, then what am I? Right? What box do I fit in now? Like, who will my people be? I mean, it's so much. It's not even just the identity, I think, linked to the job. It's who will my tribe be? What will other people, like, with this title, then what does that say about me instinctively that I don't then have to explain? And then also the money element of it, of this is how I was able to live my life. Will I be able to live this life anymore? Like, does that go up in flames as well now with it? It's so hard. How did the grief show up with you? Tell us about, take us to that moment when you lost your job, and how you processed it.
I was working in the entertainment industry, and I had a big moonshot where I was like, I want to go up the ladder of a studio, of a network. And I don't think I ever said the words out loud of like, oh, wouldn't it be exciting to like be like the first female president of a broadcast network or something like that. And I got my shot at my moonshot when I was hired by CBS in the children's programming department. And that department doesn't even exist anymore, but I got my foot in the door. And after 2 years, I was promoted to what was considered primetime programming. Not even considered, it is, it's primetime programming, which was like going from like the little leagues to the major leagues. It was a huge leap. And after 2 years in current programming and primetime, I was promoted to drama development, which was like whoa, that was like the most coveted department. And that was like winning the World Series. And I became part of the team that developed the CSI franchise, Criminal Minds. We took the network from last place to first. It was incredibly exciting, so heady. And then after 2 years, I was promoted to be head of that department, senior vice president, drama development at the #1 broadcast network. And that season, I had the highest testing pilots in network history. And then I was fired.
And let's pause there.
Yeah. Yes, it was a big pause.
Yeah, let's pause there. That, because I don't want to diminish what you did in the drama, just in terms of CBS. A lot of people are like, who listen are in news. We're not talking about the news division. We're talking about like the programming that pays the bills for everybody else, honestly. Let's just be honest. It pays everybody's bills. That in sports pays everybody's bills because it does so well. And for you to be part of those teams and then lead them, that is developing these signature franchises is what you did. And then kind of blindsided by a layoff.
Yeah. And I'm not even going to, sugarcoat it. I was not laid off. I was fired. And it was, I was blindsided, and for me, what happened created a sense of self-loathing. I hated myself. I was worthless. I was a loser. I was a failure. And even though like I went on to some really fancy pants jobs, I was the first programming chief at Epix. I executive produced a series for Netflix, ironically entitled Girl Boss.
Sophia Amoruso's.
Yes. And yet I still had all of this weight. And it wasn't until 10 years after I was fired from CBS that I recognized, and I had this epiphany that I am grieving. And it so took me by surprise, but all of a sudden everything fell into place. It was like, this is why I'm really struggling to reconnect with my sense of purpose and mission and ambition and passion and values, was that I had been decimated. And because I didn't know I was grieving, I didn't have the skills and tools to mourn. Mm-hmm. And then once I was able to mourn, I was able to return to a place of wholeness. And it was at that point that I was like, I actually don't want to be the head of some studio or network. Like, what I really want to do is make certain that no one ever experiences the sense of brokenness that I did as a result of a career setback. It's so not necessary. It's not needed. And it actually does harm to our society because we're withholding our gifts because we feel this weight of grief without knowing it.
Let's go back, because in getting fired and embodying grief, but not having the language for it, not having the acknowledgement of it, how did you move in these other, because you got other positions, how did it impact how you showed up in these other jobs with this unacknowledged grief?
Yeah. In one of your other podcasts, I heard you talking about this a little bit as well, that how high functioning you are. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I am also incredibly high functioning, and I have very strong executive function. I'm like strategy, organization. And so that was my scaffolding. The battle internally, though, was so intense, where, of course, I've always had imposter syndrome flare up at different points. The imposter syndrome so took over for me that I, in assessing that 10-year period of time before I realized I was grieving, so it manifested in so many ways, like in ways that people didn't see, where eating too much, not eating, insomnia, not being able to get out of bed. Like, I was having all of those symptoms, but I was able to hide them and mask them from people. And then how it showed up in my work is I started to hold back because I was second guessing myself. And I am a recovering perfectionist. I am a recovering people pleaser. My people pleasing skyrocketed. And I think the things that had made me so effective in my work at CBS that led to those promotions where I could be decisive, I could be creative. All of a sudden I was just like, Andrea, what do you think? Will, what do you think? Bob, how would you weigh in on this? And I am an inclusive leader, but I became over reliant on getting external validation as opposed to trusting my own intuition.
And I ask that because so many people, so through the Rewrite, which is a community of journalists and storytellers that I facilitate, so many people come to me and say, hey, all I need to do is rewrite my resume. Like, I just need to get another job and then I'll just be off to the races again, right? Like, no acknowledgement of what happened, no acknowledgement of, like, this is what you love to do, this is what your childhood dream, you are changing dreams right now, it feels like you're changing dreams, it feels like everything is blowing up, and you're just like, do you know a resume writer, so I could go ahead and just change this resume? And so we do things that are mental health, like that are so, we take a 360-degree view on people's transitions, really also focusing in mental health. But that's the thing I cannot market because nobody thinks they need it.
Well, first off, I love what you are doing with your program because I'm 100% supportive, believe in what
Thank
you
you.
do. And my version of that is spiritual, strategic, tactical.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't actually execute the tactical without really doing the spiritual work and the strategic work. And I really empathize and understand of like, I don't have time for that because
Right.
I have to get a job. I have a family to take care of. I have bills to pay. And so there's a sense of real stakes and urgency
Yes.
around that. In my experience, clients who skip over the spiritual and the strategic, they may land a job. It doesn't typically end well. They're either
Mm-hmm.
miserable or it doesn't last for a whole host of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Because these type like setbacks, like they really do hit at our psyches, and that there's repair work that needs to be done.
It is deep. It's so incredibly deep. And I was talking to somebody, and they were in a new job in a new industry. So they're already drinking from a fire hose, right? They're having to upskill every single day. They're doing something different, which is a hard thing to do. And so they were getting feedback on their work. They're doing things they've never done before. They're transferring skills. It's not a one-to-one. They're transferring skills. So they're doing so many things for the first time. So they're getting feedback, not in a mean way, but because the old job, when they gave feedback, it also meant that you're incapable, you're incompetent, you might not be in the running for, for bigger, a bigger opportunity. They took that and internalized that to apply to this new opportunity that's actually better, that's actually calmer, that's actually more nurturing, but they are triggered because it's still an open wound, right? And so these new people don't know your background. They don't know what you've been through, but you're showing up with these invisible open wounds, and the smallest thing can trigger it. So I'm always of the opinion that if you don't really start unpacking this for real, then even in the best next place, it's going to be hard for you to thrive because, you can't fully show up in the fullness of what you could offer that place and also what that place could offer you. You're not in the full position to give, and you're also not in the full position to receive.
That is so beautifully said and articulated. And I'm not a trauma expert, but in working with my therapist and having done like my own independent research, there's an element of PTSD
Mm-hmm.
that I carry with myself. So when I get an unexpected call from, let's say, an organization that I'm working with, I'm like, oh my gosh, are they about to fire me?
Yes.
And it's like, oh, the worst is when I get the email of, hey, can we grab 15 minutes later this week? I'd like to talk to you about something. And I'm like, what is like, and so my mind starts spinning and I'm like, I can tell that I'm having, like, I'm reliving the trauma of having been
Yes.
fired.
Yes. I had one job where, I mean, still in news, I went from one job to the next job. And I did something that could have been perceived as wrong. I didn't think it was wrong, but like the person I was working with was making a big deal out of it. And I had to, like, I was texting a friend in full panic, just in full blown panic. Nobody ended up saying anything to me. Nobody cared. It wasn't a thing. But in the moment, I thought I was going to like melt into the asphalt. It was just full blown. Again, it was like all these triggers that I just could, and I could, it was like out of body. I couldn't manage it. You know what I mean? Like, you
Yeah,
feel crazy. You feel
absolutely.
crazy, but it's just like, oh my God. But I had to like really do a lot of work when I left to really just unpack everything that I had been through. And I
Yeah.
still do it.
I'm so sorry that you had that experience. And you touched on something earlier. In one of your podcasts, you talked about when you were a journalist going into situations where there was violence, the stakes were like still very much alive. And I can't remember exactly the expression you said, but like swiveling, that
Oh,
you're,
your head's on a swivel.
yes, your head's on
Mm-hmm.
a swivel. And I so appreciated what you said, because I felt like I related to that, because after being fired, would go into situations where my head was swiveling and it didn't actually need to be, but
Mm.
because I didn't have a sense of safety, and I also didn't feel like I could keep myself safe. So one of the things that I had to learn through my grieving process was how to assess versus judge situations. Because the hard truth is that we may be able to pivot, we get a new job. It doesn't mean that there still aren't going to be challenges. We're still, our work is being judged. And so how do we bring our full selves into situations that have real stakes, but without the all of the history of our bad goodbyes coming into play? And so, for example, I was in a job where, like, my intuition was telling me this probably isn't a match. And there was one part of me that was like, Laverne, you screwed up again. You're a loser. You're worthless. You're a failure. And I was like, that judgment and that negative self-talk, not helpful. And I did need to get support to be able to move into the assessment part of my brain to say, okay, where's the data that is supporting this intuitive hit that things are not right? And I was able to assess, oh yeah, there actually is real data here that's telling me that my job might be in jeopardy. And
Mm-hmm.
it was in jeopardy, but because I was able to assess, I was able to revise my resume, come up with an exit strategy, figure out like what allies and advocates I had to be able to help me with a softer landing.
Yes. Okay. We're going to get to that. I want to talk about something that you just touched on as well. This is also good. This is also good. Um, is when you name the grief, right? When you finally were like, oh no, this is actually grief. And I do appreciate you saying that it took you 10 years to really acknowledge that. Because again, just a new situation doesn't mean it goes away. Right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way. What was the process for uncovering that it was grief, and what was the process of working through that grief?
I so appreciate this question, and I have started to develop a framework around this, because and it's called Learn, Learn, and it's inspired in part by the work of Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote a book called The Grieving Brain, which explains how there's a sense of being disoriented, feeling like groundedlessness when grief hits us. And the reason why is that our brain has become attached to the thing that we love, the thing that brings us a sense of identity, safety, security. And when we lose that thing, our brain is searching for it. And it needs to know through ritual, a funeral, a memorial service, that person that we love that brought us a sense of safety and security no longer is there. With career grief, we're still either showing up to do our jobs or we're looking for a job. So the brain is disoriented. So it needs to learn that this thing that we were attached to no longer exists. So the first step in that learn framework is really looking at the loss and identifying what the loss is. So initially I was like, oh, I lost my job, but now I have a new job. Why am I still not feeling like back to that sense of safety and security? It's because I had lost my identity. I had lost my sense of belonging. And we've touched on this a little bit in our conversation. I had lost a belief system that I believed that if I worked hard enough, that the company would keep me secure and would stay with me. And so that was completely shattered. And then I also started to realize I'd lost my moonshot. I'd lost my dream. And for a lot of people with career grief, it's like you're doing everything right. It's like you get the degree, you get the certifications, you show up 5 minutes early. So there are sometimes belief systems that also are lost. So really understanding the things that are lost is so, so key. And then starting to explore, what does that mean? What is the meaning of that loss? So that's the E. And for me, the meaning that I had created was I'm a loser, I'm worthless, I'm stupid, et cetera, et cetera. And that in itself was incredibly painful. So I needed to start to address the pain, which is the A. And then that leads us to then reframing the meaning, because me being a loser and worthless and stupid, again, that's not actually helpful. And so by understanding the levels of pain, understanding the loss, I was able to rewrite the story and rewrite the narrative, which is I grew up at CBS, essentially. I spent 10 years at that network. And by the time I was head of that department, I was essentially like a rebellious teenager. I felt really cocky. I was like, here's my opinion. And in that culture, having independent thought was not valued, but I didn't get it. And so it was no longer a match. And so me being able to say I was no longer a match versus I was a loser, that's a really big reframe. And then that allowed me to this last step of the framework, which is to nurture agency, which is regaining that sense of control. And again, I know like that the podcast that you did about trauma talks about agency as well. And so I was able to take my experience and I found agency in becoming a coach so that other people don't have to have the same decade of pain that I did just because of a career setback.
I love that framework, the Learn framework. And creating agency is great. I want to drill down even more on the misaligned, I guess, priorities and values, because job loss, can also be an amazing opportunity. Because I've talked to so many people. I have a friend who's going through something right now. And I was like, you don't even like it anyway. Like the way it's ending is less than ideal. But like this could be an actual opportunity, because for me, like if I didn't have a less than ideal circumstance, chances are I'd be hanging on angry to something that doesn't actually serve me. And I wouldn't have enacted any agency to explore anything else that I actually like so much more. So it's almost like I always say, like, I'm so hard-headed that God knows that he has to make it untenable to kick me out, right? Like I have to, like, it has to be just unbearable. I have to be paying a lot to therapists. I have to, you know what I mean? I have to make it so hard. That's the only way, or else I'm just going to cling to what's familiar, like white knuckle it when the loss, the transition was actually the thing that I needed to make me more aligned.
Yes. Wow. I so appreciate what you're saying on so many different levels. There are two that I want to spotlight because this is just an incredible story of how one of your greatest strengths. It's like your tenacity, your commitment, your
Mhm.
dedication is also
Yes.
your Achilles heel in
Yes.
situations as well. And I had a client who was a lawyer who was absolutely miserable in what they were doing, but was like, there was a sunk cost fallacy. All of the schooling in order to, you know, get the education to be a lawyer, passing the bar, getting the job, putting in 100-hour weeks. And when I started working with this client, he was in his early 30s, and he knew it wasn't the right job. But what we were able to unpack goes to the sense of values, which is, whose values are you living? And what we discovered is that his commitment and his dedication to being a lawyer was really about his parents' values and not his own. That his parents had had a very difficult lives. And so they wanted their son to be in an occupation that felt like it had, like, could really go the distance. Everyone always needs lawyers. It's like, you'll always have a job. Will always be a safety net. And that just wasn't, that it just wasn't his life experience, but he was living his parents' values. And so that's like a key question that I always like to ask people is like, what are your core values and how are you living them in your current career or in your current role? Because that mismatch. And there's another client just on a much lighter level who was really struggling in a job. And it turns out that she was in one of those open floor plans and she had a little cubicle. And what she really loves is nature. And she also loves having like solitude. So being in a bullpen with no access to sunlight, she couldn't do her best work. So it was like less specific about the job, but it was the environment in which she was required to do the job, which was the mismatch because those values didn't align.
Yeah, it's like the newsrooms. So many newsrooms are been like in the basement or whatever. Like there's no windows anywhere. Like what time of day is it? Yeah, no,
Yeah. I don't know how like journalists, man, it's like the whiplash of like complete isolation to then, okay, you're like out in the field and having
yeah,
to create a story with like wind and chaos blowing around you. It's
it's
astonishing.
it's a lot. And also I think because of, especially if you're not, um, I guess if you're not a younger millennial or Gen Z, no one actually asks you, what do you want? How do you work best? You came into the workforce saying, okay, this is a system, you adapt to the system, you wear the suit, you do the thing, you look like this, you cut your hair, you do, and it's just like it was very much planned out. But what was promised was like, you do that, that's a concession that you make for, once you get into a really big enough company that's good, then you get the pension and then you get the social security and then you get the gold clock. And it's like all of those have been wiped out. None of those things exist anymore. And so I really do think that it's time to start asking, did I choose this? Like, is this what I want right now? Because also, you could have wanted it before, but life changes, priorities change, values change. You're 10 years older, and it's okay for things to change, you know?
Yeah, it's absolutely natural, and I really appreciate what you're saying. And I'm a big advocate to spending on an annual basis 2 hours every year just to have that assessment process. How am I feeling about my career? How am I feeling about my role? What's resonating? What's bringing me joy? What's feeling like it's weighing me down? And then also just to get ahead of the game, which is then refresh your resume on a real like tactical approach of like, what are your wins over the last year? How are you going to quantify them? What are skills that maybe there's like a skills gap, and so there might be some additional training or a certification that will help you, continue to elevate you on the path that you want to go, rather than scrambling after a career setback to suddenly like, okay, I need to, put fresh eyes on my resume. I have to put, it's like the sense of urgency does not allow us to have oftentimes a healthy assessment and perspective on our work and how we represent it to the world.
That's so true. So once you identify this with yourself that you are in grief, and you did the work to really address how you associated yourself with your former career, what leaving actually meant to you, reframing the conversation, reframing your whole narrative. What freedom have you allowed yourself to enjoy
Ah,
from that reframe?
I really love that question. And if it's okay, I'd like to just back that up just a little bit because I glossed over the address the pain.
Hmm.
I mean, my gosh, that's a gigantic banner. and, uh,
Yeah.
and so it's like, how do we start to reframe the meaning if the pain hasn't been addressed? And the primary way that I like to do this is through creating a ritual. So
Mm.
again, much like after someone dies, there's a funeral, a memorial service, that we create a ritual once we've identified the loss and the meaning that's been created. So, for example, I work with a lot of screenwriters who have had the experience of working incredibly hard on a project for years and years or a decade, and it just never sees the light of day. It's like no one buys it, or it goes through a long development process and it never gets greenlit, or also they finally get it made and then no one sees it, or it's critically panned. And it's just, I mean, it's truly, truly heartbreaking. And so with screenwriters, I've had them print out their scripts and then write a eulogy and then bury it or burn it and then literally say the words out loud. And part of the key component of that has been rest in peace, and to really have like a good goodbye to that project, and to be able to, like, I've had clients who have said things that very much they're just so moving, of like apologizing to their script to say, I'm sorry that I couldn't get you across the finish line. I'm sorry that I could not help you. Like, they're like addressing the script, meet your full potential, that not everybody got to see your beauty. Not everybody got to see like just how perfect you are. And it's so, so moving. And there are other rituals that I've created with other clients, things like playlists as well. And so that really helps set the stage for reframing the meaning by fully addressing the pain. Um, I would love to ask you if you're even open to
Yeah, yeah,
this,
yeah.
and
I'm
then we
open to
could
this.
circle back to the reframe part of it. Is, do you feel like you were able to have a goodbye or a ritual for some of the career challenges or obstacles or grief moments you experienced?
That's a great question. Did I have a goodbye? No. And I even, my last two jobs were the most difficult. And the second to last one, I didn't even want a party. Um, but my colleagues were wonderful and they were like, no, we're not letting you leave without throwing you something. So it was like a last minute, get together. They spread the word and people showed up at a restaurant to like say goodbye. Um, and after this last job, I did not want anything. I literally was so exhausted that I was like, I just want to go to sleep. And people thought I was like joking, and I wasn't. I was like, I'm so exhausted by this whole experience, and I just want it to go away. um, so I had some downtime, not enough, but I didn't have a ritual to say goodbye to it. And in fact, last week, I went back to Philadelphia, which was a second to last stop, and for a speaking engagement. So I'm in a completely different capacity now. And it just in the train station, where I just remember being in that train station going home all the time, like, and just being so miserable. And now returning, I hadn't been back in it's so close, and I don't go back to Philly. It's just not. Philly's a wonderful city, but just for me, my experience there was just so difficult. So I felt a way like, oh wow, like I am back here. We're on the same highway that I would drive to go to work. Like, and it was just like, oh, wow. Like I definitely felt something, but then also very proud that I came back whole, because when I was here, I was so broken. Um, so there is that, those feelings, but no ritual around it. And then the other thing was, last summer when I went to the National Association of Black Journalism conference, and I was there as like for work and not as a person in the career fair with my jewel tone dress and eyelashes trying to impress a news director, that I came there and I was in the career fair in jeans, seeing what friends I could see so we could go grab a drink at the bar, and I just wasn't there to impress anybody. That was kind of, so I've had like full circle moments, but nothing to say goodbye, because I guess I haven't fully I haven't fully said goodbye. And when I left, it wasn't to say goodbye. I was just like, I would like to do this differently. But I was like, well, maybe I could, if there was a special projects team. I never wanted to be an employee. I just don't like the feeling. Um, but yeah, no, I haven't. I guess because the door was always open, but the door is closed, like closed. Like, I will never do. You never say never, but I hope to never ever do local news ever again. Like that is, I am done. I know too much now, so I hope to never do that again. And but would I be in a news environment? Not full time. I tell you that much. I'll never do that. So maybe it's because the door is not completely closed, and that I'm open to certain types of projects in certain types of ways. And maybe that's why I never said fully goodbye, because I haven't said goodbye.
Yeah. I so appreciate the way that you are able to unpack that. And I'm curious if there's a talisman of some kind that represents the part of news that does feel like that door, that you have shut that door on that part. I'm going to give you a quick example for myself, because,
Okay.
and I didn't do this again. It was 10 years before I realized I was grieving, but then it took me another couple years to like figure out how to mourn. And I had this folder, this file from my days at CBS that had some like development reports in there. And I did just found them. I didn't like steal them or anything like that. They just had gotten like caught up in like when they packed up my office and sent it to me in boxes. And I don't know why I held on to them, but I remember the day, and it was like, and my heart was beating, that I was like, I think it's time for me to throw those files away.
Yeah, I get that. For me, it's my news dresses.
Oh, wow.
So my closet is full of like clothes that I literally, it's all my news dresses. So I haven't packed them, not because I'm holding on to them either. And also, honestly, I can't even really fit them anymore. Gained a little bit of weight since I left. But it was so I did so much work remotely. And so it was a long time before I had an event where I had to be business. And so I put on, and I could not, and I remember texting friends, like, it took me so long to get dressed this morning because I hated everything. I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, ugh, I hated everything. I hated every dress. I hated it. And they're nice clothes, but I hated everything about it because I was like, this isn't even me anymore. And I really don't even know what my style is, because I didn't buy like, oh, this is my style. I bought, it's a jewel tone dress. Like this will translate on camera, like everything. My whole wardrobe centered TV because I had to, like, that was a big part of work is what you look like. So I didn't wear my hair the way that I necessarily wanted to wear my hair. I didn't dress the way I wanted to dress. So that would be it. I think when I finally get rid of all of and I have some of them too that are actually in a bag right now to donate. And I haven't done the rest because I literally would have an empty wardrobe. And although I haven't even worn the dresses, I think that like having it, I'll be like, oh my God, I have no clothes. You know, I don't want to spend money to go buy new ones. But it would be that where I sift through my closet all the time. And I was like, I have nothing to wear. And my closet is packed, but with every red, every orange. My friend who came on at the very beginning of the podcast, she's like, I had the red dress because red was like the power color. She's like, the Ann Taylor red dress. We all had the red dress for the headshots, the red, like, you know, we all had the same type of red dress. And so I need to get rid of it. And I think about it a lot. Like, okay, you need to just take a day, pack a box, get in an Uber, and go donate this.
It sounds like it could be just a really beautiful, intentional act
Yeah.
of, which things resonate for you, clothing wise, which don't. And they definitely, supported you in some aspect of your career. And
Yeah.
they, and just like in that sense of like energetically or intentionally, like this will be a gift. This could be a gift to someone else.
No, it's true. It's really true. Like a Dress for Success program or, you know,
Yes.
something like that. Yeah, that's the thing is that I don't, and that's another thing is that I just have to find an organization because I don't want to just give it to the traditional places that'll just sell it. I really want to give it to women who are trying to develop their careers in meaningful ways because this did serve me during a time. And I want it to serve them kind of during a time as well. So no, that's very good. I haven't paid too much attention to that, but I do think that it will be more than just donating dresses. I do feel like it will be like closing a big chapter. I do feel like that.
Yeah, these types of rituals are so powerful of taking the thoughts, the feelings and making things feel, visceral and tactile. And then again, like mirroring the intention of it. And I also, just as a caveat, I want to just validate, like, a ritual doesn't have, like, you can be angry, you can be frustrated, you can be upset, you can be confused, because those are all elements of mourning. And so I'm very sensitive to toxic positivity or sending out messages of toxic positivity. And so it's the ritual is the acknowledgement and validation of the feelings that you're feeling it's okay. It's
Yes.
okay that you're not okay.
And you know, Laverne, it's so funny. It's like, this is great. Because I work in live events now too, producing live events. You have to wear black. I never really wore black, so I never really had black in my wardrobe because everything was a damn jewel tone. And so now I have so much more black. Like, so I wear, it's like true New Yorker fashion, like wearing black, like all the time. Anytime I have to dress up for anything, I'm just gonna wear black. It's just so fun. It feels rebellious, right? Because I never did that. I would ask for, I mean, it was, when I say it centered my life, it was for birthdays, for Christmas, like, get me a bright colored dress. I need to add to my wardrobe because for so long I made no money. So yeah, those were the gifts that I would ask for. So it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. Thank you for that. I'm going to do it. When I do it, I'm going to take video and I'm going to send it to you.
Oh my gosh, that would be so fabulous. I love that. I love it.
For our last segment, it's called ACT UP, ACT. Those are my initials. And we talk about how to get from where you are to where you want to be. And I just want you, Laverne, to talk to people there's so many people, like tens of thousands of people have been laid off, have been fired in recent years since COVID, but really in recent months even. What do you want to say to them? What are the first things they really need to do to really start processing this?
Well, the first thing I really want to say is that whatever you're experiencing, whatever range of emotions, and I don't mean this to sound as trite as it might, is that you're not alone. And I really want to stress that because of what we were talking about earlier, is that there is a huge shame component that just floods in And even if there's like the rational brain that can say, okay, I was laid off along with thousands of other people, there's still, with most people that I know, this question of like, why me? And then to be able to, there are two types of grievers. There are head grievers and there are heart grievers. And so there's no wrong way to grieve. So some people like to process verbally, to express their emotions through writing, through art projects. And then there are other people who are head grievers who immediately want to take and need to take action. And so if you know somebody, or if this is you yourself, that you've experienced a career setback and it's like, okay, I just need to get into rewriting the resume again. It's like, be okay with that, because that's you looking to find agency. Mm-hmm. And then the one really big thing that I want to put a spotlight on, though, is being able to, either through like talking with oneself and finding some stillness, or working with a therapist, a coach, or a trusted friend, to be able to really interrogate what is the meaning that you are creating as a result of this layoff or this setback. And so there may be stories that you are creating, like, I'm too old, I'm past my time, it's et cetera. And so really look and closely examine those meanings to determine, are they helpful or are they hurtful? And if they are hurtful, then let's get to creating a ritual to be able to help you find ways to rewrite that narrative that's actually going to support you.
Laverne, you are incredible. You are incredible. And I just love how so many people will feel seen and feel normalized, because, the culture says just to keep going, and they might be stuffing. And you have given voice to the things that they may not have even felt safe saying out loud. So thank you so much for this. If folks want to work with you, and how can we support you? How can we stay in touch?
If people are on Substack, which is an amazing platform, so many journalists have come to Substack. Mm-hmm. I wish I had 10 more hours in every day to read all of these amazing Substacks. I'm Laverne McKinnon, also AKA Moonshot Mentor on Substack. Really invite you to come be a part of that community. I post weekly blogs with and podcasts that have a lot of great information and tools. And then there's also a paid tier as well. It's $5 a month, which really expands the community through co-working sessions, career grief workshops, meditations, things like that. And if you're not on Substack, you can find me at my website, lavernemckinnon.com.
And we'll put all of that in the show description. Laverne, thank you for being on. This was fantastic. I'm so glad that we were connected.
Me too. I love your work. I love your podcast, and it's great just to be in conversation with you. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Next Best Thing with Andrea Cline-Thomas, a Mountain Court Media production. The music was written, recorded, and produced by Gavin Casey, also known as Dark Purple. Now, if you like what you heard, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and comment on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to share it with friends. I hope this episode helps you on your journey. See you next time.